Okay, we are ending chapter 5, so 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and we are going into chapter 6. So last week I think we just read chapter 6. If you want to quickly just scan ahead, we're going to try to cover at least the first section if we can. I think his second section to me seems like it's more an example, an illustration. And Paul often does that, and especially in this letter, probably the most famous of which is chapter 13, the chapter on love. Chapter 12, 13, and 14 are dealing with the spiritual gifts, but yet Paul finds a way to expand on an example and run with it as far as he could. Then he realized he's going too far, so he pulls himself back. And I believe this is more of what the second section is, even though it connects with these first two sections, but it is typically a Pauline style. So starting in verse 1, it says, "If any of you has a dispute with another, dare he take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of the saints." You'll remember last week we kind of ended with, would we be comfortable taking our disputes that we have with each other before the members? Would we be comfortable doing that? I see a shaking head there. Should do it? Okay. Okay, that kind of makes you uncomfortable going to a court of law. I agree. But if you think you're going to win, if you think you might have a better chance of winning, you may do that. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Yeah, 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And remember last week I had mentioned the fact that there's an element of the church, there's a part of the church that I think we miss completely because we are Gentiles and because we are so far removed from the first century church that we don't really connect some ideas which they had. We don't really connect a lot of cultural things which they had. The Gentiles coming in, which you see in this chapter, and we'll bring out some other occasions where this is the case, where a Jewish reader, a Jewish Christian would understand what Paul was saying, whereas a Gentile Christian would have no clue. They would be completely lost. And I believe we are lost because we are in the same boat. We are Gentiles, and we are 2,000 years removed. And for us, it's a foreign concept to have verse 1 have any impact on us, because we can't imagine doing that. Okay, how many of you have gotten really upset because one of the members at church was networking? They were conducting a little business at church. Oh, we got some hands raised. One of the elders, I won't say which one, but he's sitting on that side over there. We don't like that, do we? We don't like the fact that people bring business to the church. I think there is a place for it. I think we've got to be careful. Jesus was very careful with the temple, remember? People were conducting business, even though there were things that they had to do, but it became more about the business than it became about the sacrifice. But we're uncomfortable with that. Okay, in the first century, the Jews were coming out of Judaism. They had the synagogue, and the synagogue had its own legal system. It had its own educational system. Okay, it ran pretty much all of civic activity that a Jew would engage in. Everything went through the synagogue. Our biggest problem today is that everything doesn't go through the church. We have lives outside of the church. And Paul, you're thinking that's a good thing. It's not. Because what happens is the church just becomes another institution we belong to. It becomes another club that we are part of. We don't see our world through who we are anymore. Certainly not as Gentiles, and certainly not as Americans. Okay? And that's why when Paul says this to us, that seems kind of foreign. Why would we do that? Okay, if you heard of two Christians in some other congregation somewhere here in the DFW area that had some kind of dispute, and you found out that the church selected 3 men or 3 people from the church to serve as a jury, and they had a trial at church, and they figured out what was going on and then passed a sentence down, and then the sentence was carried out, we would say, what is going on with the church? Are we now a legal system? I don't think it's so much a legal system, and I think this is what Paul is trying to get at in this section. He's dealing more with the value system, what we consider valuable and what the world considers valuable. They're on 2 different planes. We had mentioned before, I believe it was last week, the idea that there is the law and you are under the law, but there are some laws that are completely unrighteous, and therefore you have to resist them. Now, how you do that, how you negotiate your way around that is another thing, but you must be aware of the fact that you're going to pay the price when you do that. I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine whose childhood friend he had kept up with through the years, and he had gone through, I think he went to Abilene Christian, then went to a law school, I believe it was in UT, became a very successful business lawyer. And after being a lawyer for about 10 years or so, his company had some contact with another company, and there was some illegal activity going on. And in the process, he turned over information to the government on his own clients. And he went to jail. Lost his license and went to jail. And when our mutual friend asked him, why did you do that? And he said, I couldn't in good conscience live with myself. It was illegal according to the laws of all lawyer and bar activity. It was illegal, but he just couldn't live with himself. So he had to pay the price. He paid a fine, lost his license, and went to jail. I don't know if we would do that, but when we take things outside of the church, that's what we're going to expect. We're going to expect man's laws. So we must find a way to keep some of the things that are internal, and there are going to be times where we unfortunately can't avoid having contact with the outside world. I think it's very difficult for us to navigate that. Because all the time we're telling ourselves we're just like everybody else, we're just like everybody else. And Paul all the time, especially in that second section, is telling us we're not like everybody else, you're not like everybody else. And so we fight this battle. Are we a human being, or are we a human being that has a spiritual component? Are we also a spiritual being? And this is our struggle. I'm not saying we're going to get it right every time, obviously. The Corinthians did not. The church struggled with this concept. I think the Gentiles as a whole struggled with it. But I think a lot of the things that we do, we have to be very careful that we don't miss some of the opportunities the church as an organization, as a family, can provide for us. As I said, in the first century, those who were coming out of Judaism into Christianity had so many advantages that the Gentiles did not have. Okay, when they did business, they conducted it with each other. They tried not to include outside people. Now the sad thing is, more often than not, I've heard in the church, businessmen will not hire members of the church, and even in their own congregation. Because sometimes there's a bit of a conflict of interest, right? Why?
It's kind of like working for family.
Yes. Should work great, but Because you're dragging in a whole, because now you've got to fire your brother. How are you going to do that? Brother, you've been, we're leaking money. You're out. Brother didn't quite grasp what was going on in the business, right? It makes it very tricky. I was once a part of a congregation where a deacon in the congregation was the boss of one of the elders in the congregation. It was his boss. And I watched them very carefully. I thought, this is interesting. Worked out pretty good, because they were both Christians. If they weren't, probably would have worked out really badly. But here Paul is telling us there is a value system in the world that is unlike our value system. And if we take the things that are important to us into the world, you're going to get a certain kind of judgment. It's not going to turn out right. But at the same time, one of the main things he's worried about is, what does the world think of us? Look at verse 2. He says, do you not know that the saints will judge the world? I don't think he's implying here that we're going to sit in judgment on everybody personally. I think it gets down to, as I said earlier, what we represent, who we are supposed to be. That's our biggest problem in the church today, is our perception by the world. I know we shouldn't worry too much about perception, because sometimes it's unfair. They'll say some things about us that are not true. Okay, even in the first few centuries of the church, certain people would not become Christians because they heard some really weird things about the church, and they were afraid. They thought we were a very extreme, unusual cult that ate human flesh and intermarried. Okay, because they called themselves brothers and sisters, and they married each other, and they ate Jesus' flesh. Probably by the 2nd or 3rd century, it was probably pretty ripe, but maybe they made it into jerky. But that's a joke. Okay, you like that one? But that was the world's perception of the church. What is the world's perception of us today? Who wants to share some things family or friends have said about the church? Come on, don't be afraid. Okay, just another denomination. Now we've maybe done something to appreciate that criticism. Okay. Plastic. Okay.
They're the only ones going to heaven.
Okay.
They're the only ones going.
Okay. Okay, that's a very common criticism. Anyone have any others? Oh, you haven't heard anything bad about us? That's awesome. We are perfect.
The number one thing is, like she said, from other religions and all, that the Church of Christ will tell you they're the only ones going to heaven.
Okay.
And that's a very awkward thing.
Okay.
And I hope so.
Sometimes that's a little bit of a misconception. I think sometimes we say things and do things thinking we understand or grasp the concept, and then those in the world see that, and then they don't really understand. Just like I said earlier, in the first few centuries, they thought we were eating the body of Christ, the actual body of Christ. I mean, that's a really weird concept, even among Gentiles. But somebody misunderstands something that's said, and before long, people have a perception of us. You were going to say something?
They think we're hypocrites. We say one thing and we actually live a different life.
Okay. Sometimes we're criticized as hypocrites. So all of these criticisms, even though they may not be valid, okay, because if I was to say that everybody in the Church of Christ was this way or that way, would I be accurate in saying that? No, because everybody in every denomination isn't this way or that way. I mean, I can pick a really hostile religion like Islam, and I can say everybody in Islam does not hate everybody else. because I've met Muslims that don't. So that's not the case. You can't broadly paint everybody with the same brush. But you can get a sense of a group, and that's what we need to be concerned about. Paul is very concerned about that. What are the Gentiles going to think of you when you can't handle simple things? When you can't overcome and correct simple problems? He says, and if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more than the things of this life? So we in turn have to find a way to overcome our worldly mindset and start seeing things with a spiritual mindset, and then we were able to discern, then we were able to make judgments. Later he will even say that they could get even the simplest of people to make these judgments. So if we have a value system that we are using that is different to the world, and we go with a case before them, we're going to get an unfair judgment, no matter which way you look at it. And so we need to realize that the world just doesn't see things the way we see things. Now, for some of us, that's a very uncomfortable situation. I think he mentions two things here, the judging of the world and the judging of angels. And as I said, I don't think this is actually us sitting in judgment of somebody's life and then determining, heaven or hell. That's not the judgment we are going to perform. The judgment we're going to perform is the very thing that Paul is talking about. Who we are, who we identified as, how we are supposed to be living, and then contrast that with others. Okay, we're listening to God, we have a relationship with God, we're doing what He says, and then there are others. Who are the angels that we're going to judge? Satan and all his angels. Okay, one of our biggest problems is faith. Now, if we have a weak faith, we can't do this. We can't make these kind of judgments. Our faith is so weak, we can't determine what is physical and what is spiritual. So wouldn't it be great not to have to worry about faith? Wouldn't it be great to just know? And know by experience? Wouldn't it be great to be able to look into heaven and see heaven and know where you're going and know what it looks like? Certainty. We don't have that, though. We don't have certainty. So Paul is saying that angels who present themselves before God have certainty. They know. There's no guessing. Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Which one am I going to go to? Which one is better? They know. And yet Satan and certain angels that followed him chose to leave that. Now, to me, it's a hard concept to grasp. Can you wrap your mind around that? That you're in the presence of God for pretty much from the time you're created as an angel. So all of your lifespan, however that works, however God set it up, all that time you're in the presence of God, and you think there's something better somewhere else. We speak about the grass is greener. Unfortunately, if you think the grass is greener, that means the grass is always greener somewhere else. It's always greener. Did Satan perhaps think the grass was greener? Hey, I can do a better job than this. I'm a better manager than God. I can manipulate and control things better than He can. See, that's going to be our judgment. Our judgment is, hey, we know nothing. We're going just by what we have received through the example of other people and what they've written. That's all we know. We're going by faith. We're not necessarily winging it, but we're not going by a whole lot. Some of you in class, I think when Jim Crane did John chapter 17, remember when Jesus prays, and He prays not only for those who were present, but also for those who will come later, which is us. Because Jesus knows that it's a tall order to ask somebody to believe. If you were alive alive and old enough, I was alive then, but not old enough to understand what the science and space project with NASA was trying to do, going to the moon and coming back. Took about a leap of faith. Would you have got into that capsule? I'm sorry, but even today, I'm not getting in that capsule. I'm not going out there. Not even today. I'd rather be left out in the middle of the ocean, swimming on my own, than go into space. I got a better chance in the middle of the Pacific of making it than out there, because once it stops, it's over. Think of that faith that it took to do that. So much better knowing. I don't like taking those kind of chances. But that's what we have here. We have the judgment of the world, the judgment of angels, because of what they do and do not know. And then there's us who live by faith. And there's a very different way of living. This is ultimately the mark of the Christian, isn't it? That we live by faith. And that faith that we live, that dependence on God, is going to be what judges everybody else. Look at verse 4. He says, "Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, appoint as judges even men of little account in the church." So he says, even those who haven't really attained a great faith yet, they haven't spent a lot of time yet, should better figure these things out. They should better say, hey, there's something different about the way we do things, about the way that we think about things, and about the way the world does things. He says in verse 5, "I say this to your shame." So he's shaming them. They ought to have known better. They ought to have done better. Is there any difference in the 1 Corinthian church and North Texas Church of Christ? Okay, we'll do it like a court case. Yes or no? This is a yes or no answer. Let's vote by hand so you can be counted. Then I'll write your name down. Is there any difference between us as the North Texas Church of Christ and the 1 Corinthian church? Is there any difference? Okay, if you think yes, let me write your name down. I'm just kidding. I have to put you under a little bit of pressure. See, Paul's putting them under a little bit of pressure. I say this to your shame. The truth is, there's no difference between us and them. We succumb to pressure just like they do. We're going to make mistakes just like they do. Some of them are really small. Some of them are maybe less obvious. Some are really obvious. Okay, but we don't give up. Paul didn't say, okay, you Corinthians are messing up way too many times. You're out. Anybody watch Seinfeld? The soup Nazi? I like the soup Nazi. Sometimes I like being the soup Nazi. No more soup for you. No more church for you. No more salvation for you. You're out. You made too many mistakes. But that's not the way grace works. And we shouldn't get down on ourselves because we make mistakes like that. Okay? I think the church has shot itself so many times in the foot, criticizing other congregations, criticizing other individuals. We don't know all that's going on. We see something happening, we see some decision made, and maybe we don't quite understand. Sometimes it's not our place. We can't really get involved. We feel like we want to know. We feel like perhaps we can do a better job, but we don't know all that is going on. I think one of the greatest things about the church is that we can make mistakes. We can make mistakes. God knows we're going to make mistakes. But the greatest thing about it is we can recover from mistakes. No matter what the mistake is. Look at what these guys were doing. Okay? I don't know anybody in here that's taken his father's wife. Don't want to know. Talk to the elders. Okay. Big problem. Big problem. But Paul's not throwing them out. So in verse 5 he says, is it possible that there is nobody among you wise enough to judge or dispute about believers? But instead one brother goes to law against another, and this in front of unbelievers. And this is really a problem for Paul. The church is just starting out. It's supposed to be led by God. It's supposed to be on this special mission to reach out into a lost world. And then it just seems like all these bad things start happening. Paul doesn't assume that it's never going to happen. He obviously wishes they do not ever happen. But they do. Look at verse 7. He says, the very fact that you have lawsuits among you means you have already been completely defeated already. Why did he say that? Why did he say because they had lawsuits among each other that they are already completely defeated? Okay. Okay, he says that in the passage, definitely. Do we have to be right? Do you have to be right? Do you have to win? Do you have to be the best? Do other people have to be underneath you? Do you have to be in control of them? Do you have to know everything? Do you have to be perfect? Some people feel that way. Some people feel that way. They have to have these things. And if there is an appearance of that not happening, they've got a problem. They've got a problem. Yes, we should. We should. I think that's our problem, isn't it? It's that balance of trying to do the right thing and present the right example to the world. But then it's when we fail, what do we do with that? What kind of, do we just let it go? Like these people, they just let it go. Oh, we don't care. We're not going to handle it. Or we'll go outside the church and handle it. Or we'll glorify, we'll praise the guy who's taken his father's wife. That's a wonderful thing. Everything but deal with the problem. I think the world really needs us to have problems and overcome them, so that if they do, they notice how we handle them. Because we're supposed to be a place where we live in grace. We're supposed to overcome sin here. Not that we want it, not that we're happy somebody goes through it, not that we even want to deal with it. We don't want to deal with it. But we need to deal with it. It's our duty. We must do it. We must find a way to help people move forward with their faith. And here he says they're completely defeated because they've just given up. They haven't taken the responsibility. They've already lost. If we don't deal with things like we should, then we've already lost. Somebody else is going to determine the outcome of our lives. And once we turn over our responsibility to somebody else, they're in control and we're no longer in control. And I don't know how long we can do that until we have lost all ability to continue in faith. If I'm deferring everything I need to do, if I'm deferring every challenge I need to be facing, if I'm putting it off to somebody else to do it, where am I going to end up? Is heaven my goal? Am I going to end up in heaven if I just defer everything I can't? Even though I don't really want to deal with this, everybody in this room, I'm sure you've all had to deal with somebody else's problem. And it's a burden, isn't it? We shouldn't take it lightly. We shouldn't run from it. But at the same time, it's a burden. If you're married, you know what that's like, because at some point your spouse has done something wrong, has gotten ill, has had something bad happen to them, and you have to deal with it. Maybe it's your child, maybe it's a family member, and sometimes we're burdened very heavily by other people's problems. As Christians, we can't run from them. We can't let somebody else take the problem. It's not our problem. We're not going to deal with that. Wash our hands. We'll let the state deal with that. No, it's our problem. We should be more concerned than they are. We should be more concerned because we know where that person should go and may not end up there.
Reagan, would you say that that's the difference between a person that's led by the Spirit and a person that's not led by the Spirit, or
Yes. Don't go into my sermon. No, that is true. I think that's the difference, and that's the mindset Paul is trying to give them. This is the way the world thinks, and this is the way you should think. Because this is the way humans are, and this is the way spiritual beings are. And as I said, it's a tough balance, because at some point we may have to give some things up. I'll give you one. It happened in a church that I was at. What happens if we find out in our midst is a pedophile, and they've committed a crime? They've hurt a child in some way. Can we take care of that in-house? We should be able to, but we really can't. It's out of our hands. Why? Because even the law says you can't hide that. Now what do we do? It's a tough one. When I was in college, I have a psychology degree and wanted to become a counselor, because I was going to go back to South Africa as a missionary and partly support myself as a Christian counselor. And in one of my classes, we did a series of psychological studies on different people. And I asked the professor, I said, has anybody ever been healed from all of these really extreme cases? And he looked at me and he said, honestly? I said, yes, I need to know. And he said, no one has. I said, no one ever has? He said, no one ever has. It just doesn't happen. It's never been recorded. I didn't get my master's in counseling. Because you see, what's that? Yeah, you just practice all the time like doctors. You're practicing all the time, you never actually... So when you go to the doctor for an answer, you're not going to get one. You're just going to get a practice. Just kidding. Sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I don't. I think psychologists are even worse. They've already been defeated. Notice what he says at the end of 7 there. He says, why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? That's why I asked you earlier, do we have to be on top? Do we have to always succeed? Do we have to always be better? Do we have to always win? I think it's better if we lose and save someone than win and lose somebody. I think that's the spiritual mindset. The spiritual mindset says, these physical things are secondary to spiritual things. And that's hard for us to do because we just don't think that way. Someone needs help, we go to find out they need $1,000. And we start weighing it. $1,000 is a lot of money. I could help them, but they could just take advantage of me. I'm not going to give them the $1,000. Paul is saying, don't worry so much about the money. Don't do anything foolish, but don't worry so much about the money. Don't worry about the physical things. Yeah, after we've done our due diligence, after we've done what we can, we just got to let it happen. Same as here. He's saying, you can't do it this way. Rather just be wronged. Rather just be cheated. And then he says in verse 8, instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong. And you do this to your brothers. I think we know the Bible says don't lend, rather not lend, just give. Brother comes to you and says, I need $100, I'm struggling, just give it. It's not worth it. Spiritually speaking, it's not worth it. And here he is saying the same thing. Weigh it up. Which is better? Verse 9. Do you not know that the wicked will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor male prostitutes, nor homosexual offenders, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. I wonder why he says that. I wonder why he says that. Why does he convince us that the people that are doing the evil things will not get away with it? I think it's because after you've given them the money, it is now their responsibility. After you've let them off, after you've helped, after you've sacrificed and they've taken, you've done what you needed to do. If you did the best you could to help that person, did it in the best way, and it turns out the way it turns out, it's not your responsibility. Your job is to help. Your job is to do the best you can to help. Now maybe you have to say, no, I'm not going to give you that. I always say you can't be foolish. If a person comes up to you and says, can I use your car? I need to get home. And then you step a little closer and you smell the alcohol on their breath and then you say, maybe I'll drive you home. Okay, only the fool gives that person the keys. Okay, because that person may destroy your car and they may also kill themselves. So there is a responsibility we have, but once we have done what is necessary, we just got to leave it in God's hands. See, here he says, rather be wronged, rather be cheated. And then he says instead they were doing the reverse. They were going and saying, hey, wait, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. I'm going to get more out of it than I put into it. That's not why we do what we do. That's not why we help. Verse 11, he says, and this is what some of you were, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So that is their former life. That's what they used to do. And he is saying you can't do that anymore. This is a different way of living. It's a different way of thinking. This is a spiritual way. The old way you've put away, you've done away with. Can't think like that anymore. Okay, and then he starts in verse 12, 12 kind of gets us into this next section. We'll start it, and we've got just a few minutes. Just give you something to think about till next week. He says, everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. What does that mean? I don't know if we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Okay, the ultimate instruction there is don't let him control you. But what is the first part? What is it? Everything is permissible for me. How many things can you do? Okay. Should I do it? Can be done. Should I do it? That's a little bit more, little more telling, isn't it? It's not that I could not do it. It's not that it's not illegal. It's not that it's not within the limits of being a Christian. Okay? I'll give you one, just to add a little controversy. Controversy is good, stirs the mind. Should you drink alcohol? We like to go to that one, don't we? I like that one too. It gets us all riled up. I drink alcohol. The Bible doesn't say you can't drink alcohol. It doesn't say you can't. I'll give you one place where it makes complete sense, and we would probably all agree. If you don't raise your hand, I'll write your name down. You ready? We're going to partake of the Lord's Supper in just a little bit. some that argue that it needs to be wine. None of this juice stuff. Give me the good stuff. Okay? I want it from Napa Valley. It must have 50% alcohol. And it must be from this distributor. No. But here we have the Lord's Supper. What happens if we have people in our group, among us, that have an alcohol problem? See, we can put alcohol in there. In fact, it would be biblical. We'd be more biblical if I put wine in there than juice. More biblical. Shouldn't we be more biblical? Everyone agrees? Raise your hand. Yes, we should be more biblical, so let's put alcohol in there. But if I know somebody in my group is struggling with alcoholism, do I want to have them taking a little tot? Yeah. No, I don't. I'm sensitive to it. So the same applies if I'm out in public. I could have a beer, but I won't. Got to be careful. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. That's what he's saying. There's nothing wrong with it. However, there are times where we have to be careful what other people perceive of us. And I think that's where he starts sliding from this concept of how the church deals with legal issues into this example of us being the temple of God's Spirit. Now, it's one of those places I mentioned earlier that the Gentiles would have a hard time understanding. We have a hard time grasping that. Because we never grew up looking at a temple, a physical building. We never grew up going to that building. We never grew up going in there, but not getting close enough to the most holy of holy place. We could not even get into the holy court. We could only see it through the gate. We couldn't even get into the building that's beyond that. Only one guy could once a year. And if he made a mistake in there, it cost him his life. Wasn't a place he wanted to enter in lightly. Probably on the face of the earth, the most deadly place on the planet was in that little building. Because you went in there with the wrong thoughts on your mind, you're gone, you're done. It's over. You go in there with the wrong motives, you're done. I don't know if they found the body afterwards, if God zapped them so bad there was just dust left. I don't know. But you see, if we are God's temple, if we are that place, doesn't it make a difference?